This is the first time, you are the first people to see this ranking. It'll be released on Tuesday. The studies generally, our China study generally gets between 15 and 20,000 downloads by industry. And I imagine it'll get substantial media pickup because media is obsessed with rankings. So these are the rankings. We always start from the bottom up. Again, this is a ranking of the digital competence specifically in China of the 100 most iconic prestige brands. And the reason we start from the bottom up is we learned early on that if you start from the top down, the people in the room who don't see their ranking get more and more tense as the slides clip through. So we'll start from the bottom. These are the Feeble brands.
So what we saw this year, and you'll see a preponderance of brands in the Feeble and the Challenged class, which is kind of, I think, telling in terms of where the digital market is in China. It's actually, in the US and in Europe, when we measure the digital footprint, usually the greatest points of differentiation are around emerging platforms, so mobile, social media, and that's where brands really differentiate themselves in terms of their sites, e-commerce experiences. It's pretty much table stakes. In China, what was really interesting is that social media sites and social networking sites, there's increasing adoption, although in very early stages. But it was the site dimension and the e-commerce dimension where we saw the greatest stratification in some really simple things: visibility on Baidu, being optimized for translation, even having a Chinese site. But you see a bunch of brands here, very iconic brands across categories, similar to a lot of our Prestige 100 studies. You see the watches and jewelry category and the spirits and champagne category really dominating some of the Feeble ranks, and a lot of that has to do with not being necessarily digitally optimized for China, but just not making as strategic of digital investments across their businesses. But you also see a lot of fashion brands. A lot of fashion brands who have made significant investments in China. Hermes has launched a brand specifically targeted at that market, but just haven't made the requisite investments on the digital side to have a presence across the majority of the platforms. As you move into the challenged area, you see a lot of iconic brands here. You start to see some of the beauty brands creep in, and you see a lot of, we actually measured the footprint of 8 Chinese native brands. So it was interesting, in 2010, the native Chinese brands did very, very well. They actually slipped dramatically in 2011, and that's because it's indicative of the fact that some of the Western brands are starting to catch up. But you start to see some of the automobile brands, again, a lot of the watches and jewelry brands. And what we measured here, we measured 80% of the IQ is looking at things that the brand themselves are doing. But a brand like Rolex or Shiseido got tremendous buzz on Chinese social media networks by no fault of their own and gets a ton of inbound traffic. So actually, to Scott's point around the IQ, is a little bit artificially inflated just based on their organic footprint. Moving into average, and if you're in the average category, you actually did very, very well, because what we'll see as we get into Gifted and Genius is that it's highly dominated by the automobile sector. But you see the beauty and cosmetics category largely dominates the average rankings. By far, beauty and cosmetics has been at the forward-looking point around e-commerce, and the majority of the sites, and it's the only category, are e-commerce enabled in beauty and cosmetics. And from some of the member brands that we've worked with, the growth that those brands are experiencing on their online platforms is not triple digits, it's quadruple digits in a lot of cases. You also see a lot of the iconic fashion brands, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Chanel. I think that list matches pretty closely the list that Duncan put up earlier in terms of brand equity. But this category, brands that in the fashion, beauty, cosmetics, watches and jewelry, and spirits and champagnes that came in average are actually doing relatively well to their competitors. And then you move into Gifted. And Gifted, it's auto. We also see 2 beauty and cosmetics brands, Benefit, who just recently relaunched a site. We're going to be hearing from them later today about their experience in China, and Estee Lauder, who has tremendous brand equity in the Chinese mainland and has made investments across social media platforms in China, and also has created their own community. And then in the genius category, Audi came in #1. Burberry has actually mimicked a lot of their digital prowess that they've had in some of the more developed markets and is doing some really interesting things, including launching e-commerce year on year. And BMW